This tutorial is going to be about running and setting up a basic Flutter application. So what is Flutter? Well, Flutter enables you to develop applications for iOS and Android off a single code base. So instead of learning two programming languages, one for iOS, one for Android, you just have to work off the single programming language, and then you can run your programs on both the iOS and Android devices. So as you can imagine, this is extremely appealing to developers just working with that single code base. So I'm in the Flutter website here. It's important to note that it is in the beta phase, which means we're going to see a lot of changes. So this tutorial may or may not be applicable in the future. If it isn't, I will amend it to update it to make sure it runs. Okay, I just wanted to scroll down some of the main features of Flutter here. It's fast development. In other words, it's got a hot reload just to test your code out. It makes a big deal about making beautiful UIs, so that's one of the, and it's a modern reactive framework, so we'll find out more about that in our tutorials. And it also allows you to access the deeper underlying features of the native operating system, so you do have access to those low-level features. In other words, you can do everything through Flutter by accessing the deeper features of Android and iOS. And the big thing here is the unified app development. When you're writing an application, you're doing it with the intention that your application is going to run on both iOS and Android. And at the very bottom, it's got Get Started, so we'll select Get Started. And I'm running on Mac OS, so I'll click Mac OS. Okay, I'm just going to scroll on down here. And it's important that you do meet the system requirements. If you don't meet them, you can't run Flutter or do this tutorial. And it does say on these command tools you must have them. So I'm assuming that I already have these on my Mac. If I don't, we'll soon find out. Okay, now we're moving down to get the Flutter software development kit. Okay, and we're going to need to get that from GitHub. Just here, I will highlight this. So you do need a GitHub account just to be able to pull down this code. And the first command there is to clone the repo. So I'm just going to copy that, and then you will have to go into your shell. So I've got my shell here, and I am in the right directory where I want to clone that. So it's just a matter of running that command, and we will wait for that to complete. That's now downloaded. Let's go back to our instructions. Okay, the next step here is setting up the path just so your environment picks up the Flutter binaries. Now I'm just going to drop down here. I did have a quick look up at here, and it does make a further detail of updating your path permanently, so we are going to do that. So I'm just going to copy this line here, go back into my shell. Okay, now I do need to go back to that. Just after you do that, I will do number 1 here. So we're just going to refresh our bash window. Okay, so we've now done our path, so that's an important step there. I'm just going to go back up here. So we've done our path, and then it says to run Flutter Doctor, just to check to see if there's any other dependencies. So we'll run that Flutter Doctor. So run. Okay, so what I can see this is doing is it's downloading the Dart SDK. So I wasn't too sure about this, but Dart looks like Dart's the programming language that you will be using to write your Android and iOS applications. So you just, but from what I've heard is to get you up and running, you don't actually have to worry about actually writing any lines of code. You can use the widgets for that. Okay, so it's doing a bunch of stuff here. It's interesting. I'm just installing this for the first time, but it's telling me that my installation of Flutter is 28 days old. So it's recommending that I run Flutter upgrade, even though I'm just installing it for the first time. So we will follow that advice after this has been run. So let's run Flutter upgrade. It is in the beta stages, so you always want to continue upgrading if you are in the beta stages. Okay, there are a few warnings there, but I just want to continue on just to see if they affect what we're trying to do with the installation here, whether that affects us or not. I do know I need to install the Flutter plugin for Android, but we'll do that when we get up to it. So we're going to continue on. We've now done the path. There's a bunch of command line tools. We're not going to get into that. Now the platform setup. I'm not going to do the iOS setup this time. So let's scroll on down. I'm going to do the Android setup. Install Android Studio, which I've already done. You can just click on that to install it. It should be self-explanatory. And then I do have an Android device, but I do want to use the emulator for this example, this section here. And so basically we want to launch a emulator. So basically it says go into Android Studio Tools, Android AVD Manager. So I've already opened that up. So basically to get there you go to Tools, Android ADV Manager, and you'll get here. And I've already created one, but if I click edit, it will just show you the details. You can give it a name. You can change the default device here. I'm just selecting Pixel 2 here. This is the version of Android OS, so I'm sort of using the latest one here, using portrait mode. And I have selected using the computer's graphics card if it's available, and GRS2. And then we're selecting enable device frame. Now you may need to adjust some of these advanced settings if you need to, mainly in the memory. If you do have problems, sometimes it's a good idea to move up the memory in your virtual memory heap or your RAM in case you do have problems. And I did have to increase the virtual memory heap for when I was using the webcam camera. Okay, and I will just hide advanced settings and you just select finish. And so that's the settings here. And it's basically, it's going to tell us to launch this emulator. Okay, so while we're waiting for that to launch, it looks like it's already has launched. Okay, it's got a fast launcher on it. Okay, so we're running our emulator there. I'll just dismiss the warnings. The emulator is running. So the next step here is it's saying that you can start your app by doing a Flutter run. And the connected device here. But we actually haven't created any Flutter apps just yet, because I don't believe we've done that just yet. So we'll go across to the next step, which is configure editor. So it says you can build apps using the command line tools, but I do recommend that we do use the a built-in IDE. So I'm going to use Android Studio. So install Android Studio if you haven't. You will get Android Studio if we go back. If we go back, you will get Android Studio. Well, it just said here to install Android Studio. So if you do go to the next page, you should already have Android Studio installed, hopefully. Okay, and then we'll highlight this. It says install the Flutter and Dart plugins. Okay, Flutter is the environment, the development environment we're going to use to create our applications. Dart's the actual programming language that has been built by Google, basically. It's a similar language to JavaScript, I believe. So we do need to install these plugins. I have started my Android Studio. You will need to too. And because I'm on Mac OS, I need to go to Preferences, Plugins. Okay, so switch across to Mac OS. And where is my preferences? Okay, so go to Android Studio, select preferences here. And let's see if we can find, here's plugins here. And do a search for Flutter. So type Flutter and search in repositories. So there it is, that's the tools integration. We want the top one, which is languages, select install. So it's telling us that it requires the other plugin Dart, and that was mentioned in documentation, so you have to click yes to that. And that looks like it's happened. Okay, that was pretty quick. Okay, it's installed both the plugins, so we can select OK to that. And then you have to select restart. Okay, so we've now installed both the Flutter and the Dart plugins, and my Android Studio is restarting. So the next step is to create a first project and run it and experience a hot reload, whatever that is. Right, so we need to create a new app. So it says File, New Flutter Project. Select Flutter application and give it a name, then select Finish. Okay. Okay, so here we got here. Start a new Flutter project. Select that. Select the defaults already selected for application. Select Next. And yeah, let's call it Flutter app. Okay, there's nothing for the Flutter SDK path. Okay, so I'm going to point it. We got that off Git. So I need to just point it to that location here. And it's a new, I'll keep the rest of the defaults here and select Next. Okay, so once my company, I'll just call it my website, mob@tuts.com. And at the moment, I just want to highlight this part here, the platform channel language. This is if you want to get the deeper functionality from Android or iOS for that, not necessarily for basic Flutter applications. So I'm not going to select these, but in the future, I imagine that I may want to, but not necessary. So select Finish. That's now built. Okay, I'm just going to close this data analysis here. And what I'm going to select here is just run this application. We know that there is a bunch of code. This is Dart code. And just to note, I haven't written a single line of code in Dart ever. In fact, I don't believe I've ever seen Dart code ever before, but that's okay. So we'll click Run Main Dart. Okay, the application has now started. So what we're going to do here is just click on that application. And every time you click on the button, it increments the button. So our basic application is running in Flutter. And going back to the documentation, is the sample application I got of the default SDK compared to the documentation here are not the same. I don't get a hello from my app. I get a button where I press the button and increment the counter, as you can see there. So not exactly the same, but that's okay. I don't mind that. Most important thing is the application was running. So I will conclude the tutorial. The following tutorial will be writing your first application. And my intention is to release a weekly Flutter tutorial episode each time and go through a bunch of applications, and then I will pass back my thoughts of what Flutter is good for doing and maybe what it's not so good for doing. But yeah, my intention is to carry this Flutter tutorial series on for an indefinite period of time. Anyway, if you've made it this far to installing Flutter and getting your first Flutter application running, well done, and thank you for taking the time for watching this. Bye for now.